Hello, this is Barbara Fullerton, Chair of the CI Division. I would like to welcome you all to the CI and Taxonomy Division's webinar, Tips and Techniques for the SharePoint Users. We have had an overwhelmingly wonderful response to this webinar. Just a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and a link to the recording will be available on a few days later via email and on our website. Questions will be taken at the end of the presentation. Everyone will be in mute, but can ask questions using the chat panel. We would like to thank our sponsors for this event, the Taxonomy Division and Aurora WDC. Now I'd like to introduce Wendy Pose of the Taxonomy Division. She will be introducing our speakers for today. Wendy?
Thanks, Barbara. We have a couple of great speakers today. We have Zena Applebaum, who's the Manager of Intelligence and Intranet at Bennett Jones LLP, which is an international law firm based in Canada. Zena does competitive analysis of market and competitor performance, practice development, business development, and most importantly for this webinar, she enables the collaboration and sharing of information and intelligence through her firm's award-winning SharePoint-based intranet. So Zena, with her unique perspective, is going to give us an overview of managing a SharePoint project and the kind of tips that you need to think about when you do that. And then we'll hear from our second speaker, who's Mike Doan, and he's a senior level consultant with many years in information management and taxonomy management and project management. And he's done a lot of work with his clients to develop content strategies, to develop taxonomies. He works with information architecture, especially in SharePoint 2010 intranets. And Mike will go ahead and give us the specifics of what you need to think about when you're creating a term store and a taxonomy using SharePoint. So without further ado, I'd like to let them get started. And Zena, please go ahead.
Thanks, Wendy and Barbara. So the tips that I'm going to share with you today are probably much more high level, much more how to shape your intranet, and then things to think about when you're actually putting your intranet together. I've arranged it in a series of tips. You'll have the tip numbers at the top, whereas Mike's presentation is much more a deep dive, really looking at taxonomy. So hopefully we'll get a good opportunity to facilitate all of your different needs through our various tips and tricks. So the first thing I want to talk about is thinking of SharePoint as a development platform rather than a product. It's not just a product you're going to get out of the box, plug it in, and away you go. SharePoint requires customization. You want to involve your IT people or a third-party vendor, again, depending on how big your organization is. You may not have your own IT staff. You may need to go and get a consultant to help you set up SharePoint. And you need to consider your business case for creating a SharePoint project, what the requirements are, what the training is. And it's not something you just decide on a whim, hey, let's put together a SharePoint project or a SharePoint site. It's really a much bigger project than that. So think about that as you start to look at SharePoint. Oops, wrong direction, sorry about that. Tip number 2, you want to break down SharePoint implementation into stages. So building on my first tip, you're going to want to look at the many features that are available in SharePoint and really break them down based on your business case in terms of what you need to implement first, second, and third, and phase it. Otherwise, you run the risk of running into scope creep and really being unable to manage this massive project. Again, using an outside vendor will help with that as well. Tip 3, save yourself time and aggravation and make sure that your SharePoint team and everybody involved, all of your stakeholders in your organization, are all on board, all understand the business case, all understand what it is you're trying to do with SharePoint, with building your intranet, even with building your taxonomy for that matter. And make sure that you're all in sync. There's nothing worse than creating a project that will affect different users from all over an organization and have everybody running in a different direction. It makes it very inefficient and very difficult to corral everybody together. So start from the very, very beginning, making sure that all the various stakeholders are on board and in sync with whatever project it is you're doing. Talking about rolling it out once you've built it, you're going to want to communicate between all of your stakeholders. So make sure that your IT team, your marketing team, your communications team, your library team, knowledge management team, anybody that would be involved in SharePoint, you communicate between them. Maintain realistic deadlines. Make sure you build yourself in room for testing. avoid scope creep, as I mentioned earlier. And then when you talk about testing and setting realistic deadlines, who needs to test what stages of your SharePoint rollout at what point? Sometimes you're going to want a pilot group to only see certain aspects of it. Other times you're going to want to roll out a functionality to the entire organization all at once. And these are decisions you want to make before you start to roll anything out. Once you've rolled it out, it doesn't mean it's going to live and breathe on its own. The next thing you want to do is think about user adoption and how you're going to promote it. There's nothing worse than creating a massive SharePoint project and having nobody use it. And it's been known to happen. So you want to promote adoption by communication strategies. You can use things like polls and surveys and engage your employees. And you want to make sure that you're providing good training and support throughout the life cycle of your SharePoint project. For example, we here host quarterly breakfasts where we go over tips and tricks on our current intranet and show people things they may or may not have known, and they're totally voluntary. But we do them on an ongoing basis, and that helps with the adoption. It also helps with training and support. My competitive intelligence bend, and for those of you that are here from the CI division, remember that 80% of what you need to know probably exists within your organization. So use your SharePoint portal to harness that information, collect it, find it, and you may find that the information you need to know is actually already in there. You just don't know how to search it and find it. And I'll get into some nitty-gritty tips. If you want to add a tip of the day to your SharePoint portal, you can do it using RSS feeds, and it will display this little picture. And then again, will help with your adoption and help with your user education. When you want to delete a built-in column title, you delete the project name to column and then rename the title column project name. Customize your calendars, particularly important if you have a whole group of different stakeholders accessing SharePoint or multiple calendars that you want people to have access to. So you can color code them for things like vacations and meetings and holidays, but you can also color code them for different departmental events or different business lines, that kind of thing. Creating an alert system to get notified of changes or additions to your site. So perhaps you have other people who are contributing content to your portal. You can be notified when that content is changed. And this, again, going back to the competitive intelligence tool, will help you know what you need to know. For collaboration purposes, you can check out documents. And this, what it'll do is it'll allow you to make any changes to the document and check it back in so nobody else can make changes at the same time. If you do want more of a collaborative approach to a document, don't check it out. But use the checking in, checking out method to make sure that nobody is editing over somebody else's edits. Creating a new SharePoint site in a new window. Press Shift and then click the link in the Quick Launch bar located on the left side of the page. And to open a new SharePoint site in New tab, press Control and then click the link. And this is what it will look like, the little image here. Tip 13, compatible programs. If you're using things like Word 2010, drag and drop documents directly from Windows Explorer into Upload Document dialog box. Again, an easy way to collaborate on documents and to work with your other stakeholders right in SharePoint. Tip 14, you can upload multiple files with drag and drop. Tip 15, you can use the I like button as a reminder to tag content at a later time. This is a really, really simple tool, again, just to indicate tools that, documents rather, that you like, and you can go back and post them to various places within your site later. Again, from a competitive intelligence standpoint, it helps you tag documentation that you may want to use in a later date for a different purpose. Same thing with rating of content. Rating of content will improve your search capabilities. It'll display which topics are more popular, and it'll allow you to sort and filter based on ratings. Again, key for competitive intelligence, but also key in terms of user adoption. It'll really help you understand what people are using and rating. If you want search results at your fingertips, here's how you can do it. And just enjoy. I know that seems like a whirlwind of tips I was throwing at you from a various different perspectives, but SharePoint is a lot of fun, and there's a lot of great things you can do with it. So have fun with it ultimately. And enjoy what you're doing, play around with it, and make sure you just stage it out and think about it before you start. And I'll hand it back over to Wendy.
Great, thanks, Zena. Those are really good tips, and I want to remind everybody again that we're going to be taking questions at the end of the call, at the end of the webinar. And now I'd like to introduce Mike again, who's going to be doing a bit more of a deep dive on how you can set up a term store or a taxonomy in your SharePoint 2010 environment. So, Mike?
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Zena and Barbara and Eric and everyone else who's been involved in setting this up. Appreciate it. I think this is a great seminar to take a deeper look at what SharePoint can do. And I think Zena brought up a lot of great points there about how to use SharePoint. A bit more background on what I do. I spent the last probably 10 or more years working in SharePoint starting in version 2003. So come a long way in using SharePoint, but this is the first when SharePoint 2010 was released, it was the first time that there was any kind of halfway decent ability to build and use a taxonomy. There's been ways to do it in the past, but it was more pick list focused, and if you've used SharePoint 2007, you know what I'm talking about. But with 2010, Microsoft did a really good job in including a taxonomy tool. It's called the term store, and what that really means is that you can now, in native SharePoint, out-of-the-box SharePoint 2010, you can go ahead and build what we all would recognize as a sort of, rudimentary type of taxonomy that can be used to do a lot of things. For the most part, it's used to tag documentation. And in the past, you could add tags to documents to SharePoint as you uploaded them, but now it's much easier, and I'll show you some examples of that in my slides. But one thing I want to make really clear is that one of the advantages of this group is that I don't have to explain what a taxonomy is. Most of the time when I'm talking to clients and doing presentations, and I also teach graduate courses in library science at the University of Washington. I teach a course on taxonomy development and knowledge management, is that oftentimes I have to explain what a taxonomy is, and especially to business clients who may have heard the word or phrase taxonomy thrown around and they don't really understand what it means, although they all clamor that they need to have a taxonomy. They might not even know really how it can be used yet. So for this crowd, I don't have to explain what taxonomy is, except I do have to explain how it's different than how taxonomy is sort of used inside of SharePoint that may be different than how you're thinking about taxonomy right now. And that is, it really has sort of a two-pronged approach. The first side is that taxonomy can be used to tag documents, web parts, lists, pages, all the things that you think about. And tagging basically is like if you've done tagging on Facebook where you've identified someone in a picture and you've tagged them. It's kind of the same thing for SharePoint, except that you are tagging a document or an information item as you're creating it or uploading it. And what this does is it enables people to find it differently through search. So we're not necessarily talking about using a taxonomy as a navigation tool, although you can, and you can certainly do that inside of SharePoint 2010 on sites and navigation. It also can be used as a way to tag a document, and the way I explain to clients is that tagging is sort of like adding an extra layer or an extra thing to a document so that people can find it. And what I mean by that is that normally in search goes through and indexes or reads a document like a PowerPoint slide or a Word file, whatever, and then enables it for search results because it finds keywords. But with tagging, the tag term or compound term may not even appear in the document, but someone can still search for it, and based on it being tagged, it'll appear in search results. So sort of immediately I see clients, their eyes sort of lighten up like, well, that would increase the amount of search results we get, and so on and so forth. And then I go on to explain how search in combination with taxonomies, you can filter down. And if you think about Amazon, and if you type in shoes at Amazon, you get 600,000 results. But on the left-hand side are categories where you can refine with filters. And I explain to clients that's sort of how a taxonomy works in SharePoint, is that you're able to filter out what you don't want with one or two clicks to get down to what you do want, which is search results of what you were thinking about when you entered that search term. but the tags that come from the taxonomy enable that sort of filtering down to better search results. And there's a lot of other ways to do it with regarding search and search scopes inside of SharePoint. But the bottom line is the term store is the first step in Microsoft's attempt in SharePoint to allow us to build taxonomies so that we can use it for tagging and we can use it for navigation. And this helps people find things faster, because most of my clients in business, that's all they care about. All they care about is how can I let my people find things faster that we've got out of all of this siloed information that everybody's creating in their own little worlds inside of their own maybe SharePoint sites that they're building, and they're not enabling everybody else to find it. So the taxonomy, since it is and can be enabled to be used entirely across your entire SharePoint implementation, it can be used to tag things in all these different departments, and then if you set up search correctly, you can help people find things from all over the company. And that's kind of the whole purpose of using the term store and using the taxonomy in SharePoint. You can learn a lot more about it at the SharePoint site. SharePoint, just to make this even more, not frustrating, but I guess interesting, Microsoft is coming out with SharePoint 2013 soon, like very, very soon. And some of us are going down to the Microsoft SharePoint conference in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks to talk about SharePoint 2013. There's not any significant upgrades to the taxonomy term store that I've heard of in 2013, significant, although there are some improvements. So what you're seeing now with the term store is pretty much what you're going to get in the next version of SharePoint, which is 2013. I know that's frustrating to a lot of people. Some people are just now getting onto 2010, and already Microsoft's got 2013 ready to go, and that's typical Microsoft and other software vendors. So that's what we live with. But for now, what we're seeing today will be applicable to SharePoint's taxonomy for a while to come. So Zena, could you go to the next slide, please? So what's the term store? Well, the way you find the term store is that you've got to find somebody in your company who's an administrator or was going to allow you to get in and take a look at this term store, which is kind of behind the scenes. Most users never see the taxonomy term store tool. It's hidden for a reason. Admins need to get in and look at it. But if you've got a taxonomist on staff or you're an information manager who needs access to the term store, it can be set up and you access it through the site settings like this. And there's a link that says Term Store Management under Site Administration, and that's how you access it. And when you click on that, once you've been given permission to click on that, next slide, Zena, it looks like this, which is pretty fundamental. I mean, those of us who have used taxonomy development tools, management tools that are a little more sophisticated than this, let's not put Microsoft down for putting this tool in there. I'm so happy they did it. I do a lot of work, a lot of project work with customers based on the fact that they put this in. But it's not. It really is. It's pretty fundamental. And you see, there's a sort of a root called taxonomy, and then you've got these folders with little tags on them, and those are basically some taxonomy. Those are called term groups. And what I do is build out a taxonomy for a client, just like this. So you can see there's a clinical. I've built out a clinical healthcare taxonomy, HR, IT, oil and gas. And I've built out probably 250 of these taxonomies over the last couple of years. And that's what I do all day long, is just work on these things. So really, the term store is nothing more than a place to store all of your separate taxonomies. And I'll talk more about what that means to you as one company. But for me, it just means that I build out a lot of taxonomies for different purposes. And here you can see that some of them are very specific, like, I built that taxonomy just for HR, and some of them are more generic, oil and gas, public utilities, retail, things like that. So it really just depends on, who you are, what your company does, how you want to use it. You can build taxonomies in the term store for broad purposes, like for your entire organization, or you can build a taxonomy for a very specific group or purpose or usage within SharePoint. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that this is the one place you go and build all of them. How you apply them and use them in practice is entirely up to you, as SharePoint allows for that. And also another question is, people often ask is, well, will all of these taxonomies and terms in here be available for use across the entire company? They can be available, but typically you limit based on how you want to use them, which taxonomies can be used on different sites or departments or site collections, things like that. So it's pretty wide open, like Microsoft likes to do with SharePoint. They give you a lot of options, and they allow you to pick and choose how you want to use it. The flip side of that is, as you probably are aware, there's this catchphrase called Shareplosion, which means that Microsoft enables everyone to do everything, which can lead to complete and utter chaos. And that's when I come into customer sites, that's oftentimes what's happened, is that the IT group has said, yeah, you can do whatever you want, and everybody did. And that's what led them to bringing me in to help them design taxonomies to sort all this information out, is that everybody's done everything, and there's no consistency, there's no governance, there's no way to control it. So you've got the, as they say, the wild, wild west, or this Shareplosion of information that no one can find. The taxonomy is a way to start helping these companies organize those categories of information so that these tags can be applied. But I want to start here because this is what it looks like, and everybody that has SharePoint can enable this. It's out of the box. It doesn't cost anything extra. You need your IT people or an admin to go in and enable this, and there's a few switches to flip, so to speak. But for the most part, this is what it looks like, and this is where you start, and this is what the term store is. Okay, next, please. And so how is it used? And that's the next question clients ask me. Is, oh, great, you set up this cool categories. You categorized all of our topics. And I want to emphasize that taxonomy is not about where. We're not replicating a file folder structure or file server structure. We're really talking about topics. And that sometimes is a hard leap for people to make, because they're saying, well, that doesn't go there when we start looking at how we break down categorization. And really, it's not about where things go, it's about what it's about. And that's what I emphasize with clients, is that it shouldn't matter where you put a piece of information. What does matter is that how you've tagged it and how you've categorized it, because that's how people really want to find it. And that's how they should be able to find it. So they say, well, how do you use this? What's this whole point? So, you've probably done this before in your SharePoint site, where you're uploading a document, and you've got your title in there, and the name, it's a file name is name, and you can see the red asterisk, and that indicates that's required. Title, most people skip over this because they don't have enough time to put in the title. And you can see where it says customize site column is that now we've added an ability for you as a user, as you're uploading a document, to tag it. And you can see there's little tags there on the right-hand side, and there's two different ways to do this, and I'll show you a sample of it later. But this is really where, as they say, rubber meets road. This is where you're applying terms from the taxonomy to a document as it's being uploaded, because even if that document, taxonomy best practices, newsletter content, blah, 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 gets uploaded to the system, it may not contain the word activities, but sometimes people want to search on it based on activities because that's how they call it. So this way you're able to add that tag either through starting to type in the tag. If I start to type in, I'll show you this in a little bit later. If I start to type in activities, you do see that type ahead drop down where you start typing and then a drop down list appears. And then the more you type, the smaller it gets, and it shows you the tags. You can do that here. You can also click on that little label on the right-hand side there, those little tags, and you will be the taxonomy will be that's relevant to this will be exposed to you, and you can just navigate down and pick a tag or two or three, and hit save, and now those tags will be applied to that document. So if you go to the next slide, we can see here that there's that. This is a typical document library, and you've got hundreds of these in your site probably. And now we can see that second from the bottom, we see that document now has this custom site column called, and you can see where we've got the tag activities in there. So now, you could go back and re-tag all these documents. That's a lot of work. A lot of companies don't want to do that, and we can talk later about how you can do auto-classification, not in native SharePoint, but with using other tools. But that's basically it. I mean, that's how it works. Is that you upload a document, you tag it, it's saved, and now when it's indexed for search, not only the contents of the document will be indexed, but the index will also pick up those tags, and those are searchable moving forward. So taxonomies in SharePoint are used for organizing terms, and that's what I've been talking about, is that we want to tag this content, and that improves its findability because not only are we talking about searching for stuff inside, but also on this metadata wrapper that's outside the document. And typically when we come in, we build taxonomies for groups, departments, divisions, and also topics. We don't like to follow org charts because org charts change, and there's a lot of standards that we use when we're building out taxonomies that all y'all know about. ANSI NISO Z39.19 is a standard we use all the time, for building a controlled vocabulary. So we use the taxonomic standards in addition to a lot of our experience from building, literally hundreds of these things, to reusing types of categories because most clients have the same information needs wherever we go. There's for some very specific topics that we can't transfer, but for the most part, we can transfer a lot of that same information. So next. So how do you do this? Well, you know what? You can download, you can see here I've got under the root term, I've highlighted taxonomy, and there's a area I said view a sample import file. Microsoft did something very smart in that they provided you a template that you can download that's in Excel where you can build out all your taxonomies in Excel and then import them back in rather than having to build them in this interface. This interface, out of 5 stars, I'd give it like a 3-star. It's kind of clunky. It's not super efficient. Microsoft, it's here. I love Microsoft for doing it, but it's not a very user-friendly interface. You're not going to have a lot of average users doing it anyway. You're going to have taxonomists and information management people working here, so you get used to it. But the key is that you can download a template in Excel, and this is what I do with all my clients because it's easy to pass around, to update, to build out the Excel template, build out the taxonomies in Excel. You import them over into the term store, and it's a super simple import process. It comes right out of Excel. You have to save it as a CSV, a comma delimited CSV file, but it's very easy to do, and so that's what we do. The one caveat here is that in out-of-the-box SharePoint, in this tool, you cannot export any of these taxonomies for modification and then re-import them back in without doing some custom coding. So out of the box, there is no way to export it back out. And there's some pros and cons to that. Obviously, you want to bring it in, test it, export it back out. Can't be done via native. So I always advise clients, when you're working on building a taxonomy in SharePoint and you're building it in Excel, you get it as good as you possibly can and then import it, and then basically you can toss that Excel file away because you really can't export it back out. And if you import it back in, over the top, it makes another copy of it and it turns into a nightmare. So my advice is always build it to the best of your ability in Excel, import it in, and then moving forward, you're going to have to do all of your modifications inside of the term store rather than import-export. There's tools that can do it, and there's ways around it, but not out of the box. So anyway, if you go to the next slide, you can see here, this is what it looks like. I mean, it's a very simple Excel file, and don't worry about all of the other stuff. The way you have to worry about, though, is just level 1, level 2. It allows you to go to 7 levels. I typically recommend maximum 2 to 3 levels for the first pass. Oftentimes, clients really want to go super deep and create 7 levels, and I advise them, let's take a look at why you're trying to create 7 levels deep of a taxonomy, a tagging taxonomy. It's not a navigation taxonomy. And so we go back and forth, but it's pretty simple. You can see here this is a fairly straightforward layout. Not a lot goes on here. You can name the term set. You can put descriptions in on column B, what the term set's about. A term set, again, is just a collection of terms. You can add descriptions for each of these terms. There really is no scope notes area. And if you're thinking about scope notes, it's kind of limited with that regard. And also, you're not able to here, and I want to make note of this before we get there, you're not able to import synonyms. You can do synonyms inside of the tool itself, but you can't import them here. So a couple workarounds with that is sometimes I'll put the synonyms in the term description and then cut and paste them later, or I'll put them in parentheses after the term, knowing that that's a synonym. But the term store enables synonym usage. It's kind of limited, but it's there. You can't, however, import synonyms directly. But this is pretty much what you get, is what you're seeing right here across row 1, is how the template looks for import. Now this is easy to use for most business users, and you know, oh yeah, we can email this back and forth, and we can build this out, and once it gets to a part where you want to import it, is that you have to save it as a CSV. And so remember that if you're building out an Excel file and you've got a lot of different worksheets, you know, the tabs along the bottom, you can't save that as a CSV. It's only going to save the screen that's visible. I've made that mistake a few times and learned lessons. So make sure that you understand it. Even if you're building all of your taxonomies in an Excel file, be sure that you've got to save them as CSVs, and make sure you're aware about the pitfalls of saving CSV versus XLS. So anyway, this is where it's built, and it's pretty straightforward and simple. Next, Tina. Again, easy to collaborate, and that's what we've been talking about in this presentation is collaboration. I oftentimes tell clients to build a team site for the taxonomy development, upload all their documents there, like these Excel files, and then it makes it a lot easier to build the taxonomies out once you get them done. And there's that point again. Once it's imported, it's more difficult to make modifications. So do as much as you possibly can prior to importing it. Yes, you can delete a term set once it's in the taxonomy term store and then re-import it. That's perfectly fine. The only challenge there is if you've done any modifications to the taxonomy once it's imported, again, those probably aren't going to be inside of your new spreadsheet, so you got to watch it. It's kind of tricky. Next, please. Term sets. So these are term sets. You see they're like little collections of tags in a tray. And the term sets are basically major categories. So for example, here I built out a clinical healthcare taxonomy, and that's that big term group, a little folder. And I've got different term sets underneath of these for departments, facilities, forms, job roles, P&P, etc. One of the things that clients initially have a hard time getting over is that they still think this is navigation. And what I remind them is that this is not navigation, these are topics. So there's a topic of departments in this, and they'll have different departments in there. There's a topic called facilities, and it could have a lot of different facilities within this healthcare organization, and forms. So that's why clients, well, you know, why are departments at the same level as forms? That doesn't seem equal. And I'm like, well, it's not equal. So this is we have to really think about these term sets as these major categories, and then underneath that you can have a lot of different terms and hierarchies and things like that. But these really need to be, the idea here is that these term sets can be reused a lot of different places, so they're basically going to be major categories, and then underneath here, underneath each of these term sets, you'll build out you know, hierarchical levels and your tagging schemas and things like that. So if you go to the next slide, I think that's just what I'm saying here, is that these are more for organizing your terms into big buckets rather than these are not going to actually be used as tags. So in other words, you wouldn't want to tag something with job roles, R-O-L-E-S. That's a category. I mean, that's a major categorization bucket, and you're not going to use those tags. They're too high level. And the second thing is, you can do polyhierarchy by placing the same term or reusing the term in a taxonomy in the term store. However, you can't reuse the same term within the same term set. So Zena, sorry, could you back up one slide, and I'll make back the other way. There you go. Thank you. So in other words, if I've got a term I want to reuse twice within the term set job roles, I can't do that. And you know, it's a little bit more lengthy explanation about why, but you know, none of my clients really understand what polyhierarchy is to begin with, but they just say, well, can we just reuse that term? And you can't reuse it within the same term set, but for example, I can reuse the same term in, say, departments and facilities. I can reuse the term across those two term sets. Sometimes that's needed. Most of the time it's not. But I want to point out that, you know, from a taxonomist point of view, the polyhierarchy inside of the term store, not exactly what we like, but it's what Microsoft does. So we have to play by their rules in this case. There's ways to create the exact same term, the exact same label within the term set, but it's going to have a different ID, and it starts to get very confusing very quickly. So my advice is don't do that. But having said that, I also have done it once or twice because the need was there. But in the governance model you set up for doing your taxonomy, that would be important. So 2 slides forward, please. Consistency is what we want here. So if you're going to use and, it's often best to use and throughout. Ampersand, whatever you're going to use. It's best to keep a consistency about how you do these terms, and just long term, as you start to use the terms for more, you'll understand why I'm saying this. Is that using that and users, for the end users mostly, it provides a consistency that they like. So I would say, keep those term entries consistent. Now, that's a normal process, I understand, but moving forward inside SharePoint, that's something we want to keep in mind. So we'll go to the next one. Here's what I was talking about with those high-level buckets. So we had, again, back to clinical healthcare departments, and you can see the first 2 facilities informed are kind of grayed out. I don't know if you can make that out on your screen, but the first 2 are grayed out, and the second 2 aren't. And what SharePoint allows you to do is you can see where I've highlighted they're available for tagging, and what that does is you can turn off those terms so that they cannot be used as tags. You really don't want anybody tagging a form with the label forms. You want them to tag it with the category underneath that, the term underneath that category, which would be a topic about forms. So there's a lot of ways to do this, to control how users do or do not see these terms for tagging. One of the biggest challenges is that you don't want to confuse users with too many tags, because then they just start randomly applying things if they have to. So limit the amount of visibility, so to speak, your users will see with the tags, and that'll sort of encourage them to tag. And that's something else. One other thing I want to talk about real quick before I go trip off this slide is a lot of times clients ask if users are able to submit their own tags. And right above that, available for tagging, you see submission policy. Right now, this is a closed term set, which means it's not users are not allowed to add terms here. When users, because they will, want to add their own terms, they can add terms into that type ahead field I showed you earlier, and they'll appear in a special collection underneath the system, which you see on the left there, called enterprise keywords. And those are just terms that people have added. And so as part of your governance policy for your taxonomy, it's good to go in and review those keywords every once in a while, because sometimes people come up with really good terms that you didn't know about, and you can just promote those into the official, quote, taxonomy from the enterprise keywords, and it makes it available for everyone to use. Just a little tip right there about, taking the folksonomic nature of taxonomies that we like, but controlling it inside of the control vocabularies, which is taxonomist, I think we like even more. So next, please. And yep, similar purpose term sets, or make sure that you don't want people tagging with those high levels because it tends to dilute the search results. And so next, please. I think I'm getting close to the end here. We're going to start getting some questions. Here's what I talked about earlier with regard to other labels, synonyms. So here we can see I've highlighted the term admissions, and I've added 2. I put a finger quote this, I know you can't see it, synonyms. Typically, this is where you put acronyms because they would be equivalents. And I always recommend the full spelling and then put the acronyms in the other labels. And this is where, when I'm doing a type ahead and I started to type, what we're saying here is that yes, as taxonomists, we know these are not synonymous terms; they are related. There is no other way to put in related terms into here. But what this does is, as someone starts to type, and say the word, let's say this document's about admissions, and someone says, well, I call that patient admitting, and they start typing in the tag patient, P-A-T. What they're going to see is, in the drop-down, they'll see the phrase patient admitting, but they'll see that it's pointing back to admissions. So let's go ahead and click on that, and it'll apply the tag admissions. It won't apply the tag patient admitting. Kind of tricky. There's ways you can do this to set this up to make these sort of related terms, but out of the box, this is somewhat misleading, but still, still good. It's a helping tool to help users pick the right term rather than allowing to show relationships between, say, reception and admissions. And we know those might be synonymous, but be careful that this is not true synonyms. These are just helper words, I guess you could say. So next slide. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you here. I know we can go back and see the recording. And here's an example of that. I can start typing in reception, and you can see it's highlighting the word reception in parentheses. That indicates it's the other label. But really, the admissions is the preferred term to use there. So if I clicked on this, it would put the word admissions in the box, but not the word reception. So not the greatest, but still better than nothing, because it's better that they see, as they're typing in reception, that they see their word and click on it and apply the term admissions. But there's going to have to be ways that you set this up such that, you know, in your search scopes, in your search indexing, reception equals admissions. A little bit harder to do. Next, please. Yeah, there you go. This is something you just do in training, and this is something that you have to test out a few times and show it, and I do some video stuff with that. Anyway, next, please. I think I'm about done. Last slide, yeah, governance. And here's a little governance model that I like to promote. Taxonomies, here's my kind of thinking and my experience on having done this for a number of years, is that I always tell clients, you know, nobody cares about taxonomy till one person cares, and then everybody cares, and then it turns into a battle, and then it gets, you know, weird. So I always say, set up your taxonomy governance model in advance, or as you're building this out. And when I do this, you know, I've already got like 125 canned policies and procedures for building taxonomies that I use with clients, because they're like, well, we don't know how to do this. And most of the time, clients don't have full-time taxonomists on staff. So the challenge there is that they don't have professionals who really understand this. So they are limited in how they can do this. So setting up a governance model helps people understand, all right, we can't just go build this taxonomy how we want to, all of us. We need to follow a certain set of rules, policies, and procedures to building a taxonomy. And then it's a lot easier for one person inside of a company to kind of monitor how the taxonomy and the term store is being built out. And because it does make a huge difference with regard to search and findability. So next, I think I'm done with this. Oh yeah, good. So that's it. So that's it for me. And now I think we've got some time left here for some questions. So I'm going to go on mute and toss it back to, I guess, Wendy.
Thanks, Mike. I think, Eric, you're going to manage the questions for us?
Yep, we've got a whole bunch of questions, and you might want to unmute, Mike, because a lot of them are about, I think, stuff you've just been talking about. So I'm just going to read through them and go ahead and address them. We've got about 18 minutes left. So the first one is the term store management tool available on the SharePoint Foundation server?
Yeah, the term store it comes with every implementation of SharePoint 2010 that I'm aware of, and I use it online. I only use the SharePoint tool online because I can't, I'm not a large organization, but every implementation of SharePoint 2010 should have the capability of using the term store. It just has to be enabled, and it doesn't automatically appear. You've got to have your IT administrator or somebody who knows it go in and enable the term store. But as far as I know, it's available with every implementation of SharePoint 2010.
Okay. Does SharePoint Online have taxonomy support?
I guess you got to define support. I used SharePoint Online, since it was available over a year ago, every day, and I have had excellent, and this is kind of scary for Microsoft, no offense to Microsoft, I've had scary good tech support from Microsoft. I cannot believe how good the tech support has been for SharePoint Online. I've had specific taxonomy questions, term store questions online, and these guys are just on it. So, kudos to Microsoft because they've done a great job with tech support. I'm always afraid of tech support. And taxonomy is a very, as you guys know who do this, is a very languaged, nuanced thing to work with, and I have had nothing but great success with people helping me from Microsoft with tech support for online, the taxonomy tool. So, I wouldn't say it. I'd be honest with you and say it was crummy if it was crummy, but it's actually pretty good. So I'm very happy and I'm pleased with that.
Next question is, can you import a more complex taxonomy created in a standalone taxonomy tool into the term store?
As far as I know, the only way you can import out of the box, import a taxonomy into SharePoint term store is as a .csv file, which is a comma-separated file, and however, it doesn't have to be from Excel, I assume, but you know, that's the only way that I know of out of the box to import taxonomies. Now, there's other tools out there. You can go to Codeplex, and you can read all day and night about different guys who have gone out and built adapters to import, export. In the term store, there's commercially available tools, relatively cheap, that will do that, import, export. But as far as I know, out of the box, it only imports .csv files, and that's what it has to be. Now, you know, other tools allow different formats, but that's the one. That's the one that out of the box, and that's what and most of my customers are still in the out of the box phase of using SharePoint. And then they start customizing it. But CSVs are the only format that I know of out of the box that'll bring it in.
Next question is, can you create folksonomies, that is user-created tags, in SharePoint 2010?
Yes. So what you do, I think I mentioned it in there, maybe, sorry, I wasn't clear, is that users can contribute, if you allow it, users can contribute tags to different parts of your taxonomies, but they appear as enterprise keywords, and they're not really sort of approved. And so you can drag those, you can cut and paste those, move them into the approved taxonomies. You can also open up your term sets to allow input, you know, their own terms. I would be careful with that, of course, because once a term is in there, people are going to start using it, and if you haven't vetted it and sort of you know, gone through any kind of governance model to check it, you know, it can be done, yes, and I like it because it allows users to contribute terms where you don't have to do all the work of going out and finding them all. But the pros and cons are there, and I think you're going to get that. But yes, it can be done. Users can contribute to those term sets, but I would put you know, some restrictions on that because bad things can happen.
Next question is, how many levels deep does SharePoint taxonomy go?
In the template, it allows you to go 7 levels deep. And that's a pretty complex taxonomy, in my opinion. Like I said, I've built a lot of these over the years, and to me, a 7-level deep taxonomy, and I know there's exceptions, but to me, a 7-level deep taxonomy is starting to echo navigation rather than topics. And yes, I know. I mean, I've built them for clients 4 and 5 levels deep, and they've used them effectively. But it starts to become a challenge when it goes that deep. I have never done anything deeper than 7 levels because I always like to, you know, follow that template on import, and that's pushing it, in my opinion. That's pushing it.
Next question is, we have millions of documents accessible via our SharePoint site. How might we apply a taxonomy to all of them?
Well, step 1, build it. Step 2, go back and manually retag every document, or, which is not going to happen, I realize I'm being somewhat facetious, but there are tools out there that will go back and auto-classify or read through and index all of your content and then automatically apply tags from your taxonomy to those documents. And there's a little bit more sophisticated. SharePoint's not going to do that automatically. You cannot do that auto-classification in SharePoint out of the box. The tools are, you know, I guess you could say not that expensive compared to doing it by hand, which was impossible, you know, almost impossible to do and too costly. So that's where auto-classification comes in, because that's the one way that you can retroactively apply tags to a large corpus based on the taxonomies that you've built, and there's rules inside of the auto-classifying tools that allow you to fine-tune the auto-classification and to set up how many tags get applied, et cetera, et cetera. So aside from doing it by hand, there really is no way to do that out of box SharePoint, but there are auto-classification tools that will do that, and that's kind of what they're designed to do, is retroactively apply those tags.
Next question is, I need to keep my SharePoint taxonomy synchronized with a very rigid corporate-wide taxonomy. How do you recommend dealing with the end users not understanding the corporate taxonomy terms? Is there a method or product to display alternate terms in SharePoint like a nickname?
Well, aside from the little one I showed there that has other labels, and it pops up in parentheses that as people are doing type ahead, that they can see the association between their sort of nickname or alternate term and the preferred term. That's one way to do it. I think if the question is more about if I say I'm entering a search term in a search field, and I want to see synonymous terms that way, I don't really know how that works because that's more on the search side of the house than the taxonomy side of the house. But I imagine it can be done with a smart developer who knows how to do search, modify search results page, and search engine, things like that. But the other labels feature inside of the term store might be something that you could explore to have alternate terms. And like I said, they're not really, they can be synonyms like acronyms, but that's kind of a loosey-goosey arrangements that Microsoft put in there for other labels. And but it certainly can be exploited to, I think, do what you're trying to do, which is to let users see their nicknames or their other terms as they're typing them in to tag something. That's the only way that out of the box that the term store can manage that.
Zena, I think this one's for you. Can we see an example of the Bennett Jones award-winning site? Just curious to see what makes it award-winning.
Sure. So if anybody has seen the Nielsen Norman Awards for 2011, that's what we won. And we have a whole documentation in there. I can't launch the site right now for confidentiality reasons, but whoever asked that question, if you send me an email personally, I can send you a scrubbed version of the site, and anyone else who wants to see it as well. Some of the things that made our website award-winning or our internet award-winning is our faceted classification. So we took the approach that we used what online retailers use for setting up our portal. So the way you search for documentation is very much like, give me all the women's shoes you have in pink, rather than searching for content the way people would normally just type a term into a search tool. So faceted classification, as well as the multiple layers of law firm, both administration and knowledge management, and combining those two in a very usable format. So anyone who's interested, shoot me an email, and I'm happy to send you screenshots that are scrubbed from what I can show you online today.
All right, we've got a bunch of questions left, so maybe we should pick up the pace a little with our 8 minutes remaining. Have you ever used common misspellings for synonyms, such as in the case of confusing acronyms?
Yeah, well, the answer is yes, and but again, the tricky part is that the other labels that you saw in the term store are helper terms, so people pick the right term. And so misspellings are more of something that would be included on the search side. But yes, that can be done. Yes, I have done it. But again, it's sort of like people really, as they're typing in to do the type ahead feature, if they're misspelling it, it will guide them towards picking the right term. Yeah. So yes, you can do it. Yes, I've done it. But it's it's kind of cheating. But I have to admit I've done it. So it's just a way to accommodate common misspellings, and I've had clients ask me to do that.
Can you recommend any good print resources that cover term stores in any great detail? All the books we've found have little depth on the subject.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have not run across a book designed specifically about using the term store. I mean, there's a lot of papers out there. There's a lot of guidance. The SharePoint site does a good job of it. I've done videos about it, tips and tricks. But I don't know if there's videos out there about using the term store in SharePoint, taxonomy in SharePoint. But books to just haven't seen any because it doesn't seem to be big enough of a topic to maybe warrant a book. Maybe like an ebook. Maybe I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of telling myself I should go do that. But I know I haven't seen any books out there at all specifically dealing with the term store. Yeah. Most of them are just chapters or sections of a larger SharePoint book. Yeah, that's too bad. I guess I may think about that.
Mike mentioned that the example is a closed taxonomy, so users can't edit the terms. What's it like in the open taxonomy scenario? The user can update and change the taxonomy without SharePoint term store administration awareness. Does SharePoint generate an automatic report, etc.?
Yes and no. So yes, you can go ahead and make changes depending on your permissions level. Typically, it's just adding terms. No, there really is no reporting feature that I know of natively out of SharePoint that will talk about the term store. I'm sure there's somebody who can write a script to go and do that. It's nice if that's a nice feature to have. The other taxonomy classification tools that you can buy, the commercially available ones, typically have reporting as part of what they do because that's important. I just don't know of any, or have I used any reports generated out of the box SharePoint with regard to terms and term usage. But that's something that is, to me, important. I mean, I want to know how many terms are being used and with what frequency and who's using them, and that's great information to have. And there might be ways to do that. Again, I would probably check Codeplex or some other way. If you got developers on your team who can, look into reports, generating reports out of SharePoint, that'd be a great feature to have. I'm sure it's available out there. Someone's probably looked into it, and it would be a nice to have inside of native term store. The reporting capability.
You referred to a SharePoint metadata wrapper. Could you explain that concept a little?
Yeah, so those tags I showed you, I'm talking about the metadata wrapper would be just a layer of, and I don't want to get too, teachy here, a layer of meaning applied in addition to what's in the document. Oftentimes people are searching for things based on sort of a topic rather than a specific keyword. And if you add the tags in addition to on top of the document, so to speak, and I think of it kind of like a wrapper because you can see that there's terms on top, outside of the document itself, that oftentimes helps people find things because sometimes the keyword doesn't appear that they're looking for or searching on does not appear in the document, and so if there's a wrapper, a metadata of metadata, which are just basically terms about the document rather than terms contained in the document, sometimes it makes it easier to find because it allows you to sort it based on a category rather than a specific keyword. And Zena brought up the thing about the Amazon. It's the same thing. You're basically adding those layers of faceting that aren't contained in the document. And there's just nothing more than really a way to regroup the information.
We had two separate questions about examples of those auto-classification tools that you could recommend.
Well, there's, I don't know how commercial we want. I'm a consultant that uses tools. I don't get paid to, recommend software. I don't work for software companies. I have a taxonomy software company out of business now. But I think if you just do, I wouldn't feel comfortable recommending a specific one. But if you do a search on your, an internet-related search for taxonomy management tools or taxonomy auto-classification tools, there's only about maybe 4 or 5 in the marketplace to choose from, and the prices range from, the simple ones are around $1,500. The more complex ones are going to run $80,000 to $100,000, and there's a wide gamut of capabilities. But there's about 4 or 5 in there, and you can email me offline. I can recommend it. I just don't like to be making commercial recommendations on something like this. Forgive me if that upsets you, but I like to keep this not a business commercial discussion. But they're out there, and there's not that many of them. And once you find one, you can kind of find the other ones. Great.
Well, we have about a minute left. I've got about 8 questions left, and they're kind of all over the map. So maybe I'll just pick one, and we can kind of wrap up on that. can a portion of the taxonomy be updated without having to update the entire taxonomy? In other words, updating taxonomies in different sections of the overall taxonomy.
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is yes. And that's the reason why I said that you really want to divide them out by categories at that higher level so that you can do just that. And as opposed to just building one large taxonomy and having everything categorized underneath it in a hierarchical fashion, it's better and a little bit more agile to edit them in groups rather than topic groups rather than just one big taxonomy.
Very good. Well, we're at the hour. Barbara, I'll turn it back over to you to take us out, or Wendy, or I'm not sure which one of you wants to wrap up, but I think we've got a couple of questions lying out there. My recommendation is that you direct them via email or Twitter to Zena and Mike after the conclusion of the call. And as a reminder, I know we will be posting the recording of this and perhaps a PDF of the slides as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. This is Barbara. I want to say thank you again for attending our session today. I appreciate our speakers for their expertise and knowledge. Thanks again to Aurora and the Taxonomy Division. And just a reminder, as Eric said, the recording will be available on our website, and also the link will be sent to you via email. And then for the CI Division, our next webinar will be December 7th, and more information later on that topic. Now I'll turn it over to Wendy.
And just to second what Barbara said, thank you both for a great webinar. Thank you everyone who's here for your really excellent questions. And I want to just give a plug for the Taxonomy Division's next webinar, which is going to be on December 6th. And Gary Carlson's going to talk to us about the role of taxonomies in content strategy. And what he means there is the intersection of taxonomy and user interface design and information architecture. So again, if you like this one, you'll also like that one. And thank you very much, everybody.